the later meetings that we had today, and then I've reset all of my set with a bunch of which I thought that Jeff and Brandon, I thought that you guys would both love some things that I went to go and try to find from like comic book stores and a couple places that I go here in SAC that also had like choose your own adventure books.
Nice.
Which were like cool. A lot of fun. But I also went and found, so I've been like digging through my garage. I've got all my props over here. And I found my original Star Wars Episode 1 cards, movie cards that came out.
Oh, cool.
Which was like a lot of fun kind of way back when. And then I also found a friend of mine and I were able to procure these. These were all these Power of the Force figurines. Here is the Fett Man.
Oh my gosh, that's
Boba
awesome.
Fett. This is from, I mean, all of this is still in the box. It's 1997. So
that's crazy. I should show you guys my Phantom Menace stuff sometime. That those are kind of tiny in my frame right now, but those are so cool.
I have like a ton of Phantom Menace stuff because, I mean, of course I've got up on my, I think I still have it on my desk from a couple of episodes ago. I have my ticket from going to Phantom Menace. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I went to the midnight showing, of course. Yeah, one of the best experiences, mirrored by one of my first kind of like, I don't know if this was good. You know, I think we might have talked about this in a previous episode, and maybe even Brandon when you were here the last time. But it was like,
I think so.
When I went to Phantom Menace, it was my I turned 18 that night, and it was like one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had. Everybody in the theater was someone that I knew. Everybody sang happy birthday to me, and then Phantom Menace started, and I was like, oh my gosh, this could potentially be the greatest night of my life. And then I walked out of the movie with my girlfriend at the time and got to the car and said, I think that it was bad. I might need to go and see it again to make sure. And I then went and saw that movie 3 or 4 more times that week to be like, maybe I'm missing something here. But yeah. It was great.
I really
wish. That's the worst when you don't even know if you didn't like it or not.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
it just confuses you.
Oh, it was so many things. I mean, it was like this moment where I just didn't have. It's funny. It was as if I suffered a real trauma. I didn't have the tools to describe how I felt. I wasn't. It was one of these things where there was no way that movie, unless George Lucas had come out from behind, like the back of the theater and like came out and was like giving everybody high fives. That was it was too much. It was too big at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think it could have lived up to anybody's expectations.
I don't remember how I felt when I watched it. I just remember like sometime later feeling that like I had to go back and rewatch it because when I watched it, I was too much of like a glam. Like a glam, oh, Star Wars, it's Star Wars, and just walking out of the theater like, what'd you see? I don't know, but it was Star Wars, and it was a lightsaber battle, and it was awesome. But I could remember nothing about it. It like took me like months to go actually watch it again. Then you're like, okay, that was a movie. That happened.
It was a movie.
It was, yeah. It was a series of pictures that moved in motion.
Yes. And I think I saw this happen to me in a theater. So I mean, like, wild.
It was funny, like how I was at the time, like trying to justify things. Like I'm there with my girlfriend, and she fell asleep in the movie, and I was like,
not a good sign.
Always
not a good sign.
Yeah, it is the midnight showing myself, so that's why she's asleep. And then it's like, and then I'm like, yeah, and I mean, we've had a big day. And then I'm kind of looking around, and the faces of the people that are, it was like I was having this shared experience of like, and everybody's just like kind of looking, trying to figure out like what's happening right now. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Oh man, yeah. I'm trying to remember. I don't actually have a lot of memories. Like when I saw the movies, I do. There was a theater in Lakewood where I grew up in SoCal, where I saw the Clone Wars, and I don't remember the date. Like I just remember being in this theater, and it was a type of movie theater that they had like 3 or 4 of their theaters were huge, like just enormous, and they were low floors. They didn't like angle up real steep. They did this. And like almost like a concert venue, like angled out, and then down there was like a pit in the front where the projector projected up on the screen. It was really strange. It was supposed to be like really awesome at the time. The theater had like done full THX to like play these movies, so they like overhauled their like sound system to be THX compatible when they played the movies. But again, like I remember just that I was just so excited to see a Star Wars movie in a theater that I kind of like glossed over any imperfections in the movies just because I was like, but I'm seeing Star Wars in a theater. Yeah. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it happened again for me too. Like when The Force Awakens came out, I was the same thing. I was just like, this is a Star Wars movie in the movie theaters.
Yes.
It's the Millennium Falcon. Woo!
I know. I saw it with a few people. I saw Force Awakens with a few friends, and as we're watching it, a couple of them were like not Star Wars geeks at all. They're like, "Well, I'll go see because it's Star Wars. I'll go see it." And the whole time, and I'm like watching this, I'm going, like I'm enjoying it. They're like, "This kind of feels like the first." And I'm like, "You shush, just shut up." Like this kind of feels like the original. I'm like, "Stop talking right now. I don't need to hear this. We can do that later. I just need to enjoy this because this is badass."
Yep.
I have this like hilarious story by the way, The Force Awakens was this movie that I could not watch enough. I like watched it several. That's probably the one that I've seen the most in a theater, where I was like going and going and going. Like I remember I was on a business trip and I was in Florida, and a meeting was canceled, and we had like the rest of the afternoon to ourselves, and they were like, "What are you gonna do?" And I was like, "I'm gonna go see The Force Awakens again." And I just like went over to The Force Awakens and watched that. But I remember I had this like kind of amazing experience where it's like the only time where I felt like, and maybe I used my one chance at kind of forcing the universe into my box and making it work. I was in Philadelphia at the time. I had gone out, I'd flown out for business, and I was in Philadelphia at the time. And it was a risky trip for me to take because I was going to be flying back from Philadelphia to Sacramento the day that I was going to go see The Force Awakens. And by the way, I just said it was a risky trip to take. This is me balancing my professional life against a movie that I really wanted to go see. And so I'm in Philadelphia, and there's all of this rain. And it's just coming down. And they're like, and so I'm supposed to fly back in the morning. And now I'm losing the morning time. And now I'm going to be there in the afternoon. And now I'm going to be there in the night. And my wife and I are seeing the movie at the midnight showing. And my wife is like texting me, and she's like, "What are you going to do?" And she's like, "You might have to go see it in Philadelphia." And I said, "No, I am going to figure out a way to get there." And I went up to the desk at Delta, and I was like, "You need to get me back to Sacramento. It is urgently important." And they're like, "How urgent?" And I was like, "It's something that I've waited 30 years for. You got to get me there." And so then they flew me from Philadelphia. They're like, "We're going to try to fly you around the storm." And they flew me to like Dallas, and then up to Denver, and then down to Los Angeles, and then into Sacramento. And I landed with like 15 minutes to get to the theater. My wife was waiting. I was like running through the airport, jumped into the car, and my wife drove me. My wife was there waiting for me. We got to the theater, and we got there like right as the previews were ending and the movie was coming up. And of course we had bought our seats, like they were like reserved seats. And it was still to this day like this like, "No, I'm gonna make it." And it was just this like leaving it all out there on the field to get to a Star Wars movie. movie, but still one of like the greatest
like it would make
experiences.
for like an early 2000s comedy. Like it.
I feel like that was an episode of How I Met Your Mother. I feel like that's what that was. Or Friends.
Oh, I mean,
or Friends.
I'm not gonna lie. They were like meeting me between gates because I was like convincing the airline staff, I need to get off this plane first to catch the next flight. This is gonna leave in 25 minutes after we land. So I need you to let me off first. And it was just this like, I was amazed at how well I was convincing people that I needed to do this, and people were just like, yeah, go for it. Run. You can make it. And all I was missing was the Ferris Bueller, the bum 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 bum. You know what I mean?
See, I was actually imagining more of like Chariots of Fire, or
oh yeah,
or Chariots of Fire, or Eye of the Tiger, maybe like something like that. I'd see that just as you're running through.
Yeah,
people are like, "Why are you running in slow motion? Just get there."
No, I'm telling you, there was a version of me doing that where someone could have been playing in the background, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. And I grabbing hot dogs off of like people's table and eating them, just like making it,
I don't. My Star Wars stories are nowhere near that good, but I do have a story of like getting onto a plane and trying to get home, like in a snowstorm. I was in Chicago when I worked at one of the first companies I worked at. We were in Chicago for like a big network operations move, and my buddy and I were there for like a week. And we were trying to get home, trying to fly back to Reno, and for like the day before or the 2 days before, they'd canceled all the flights. And we're like, okay, we're here for 2 days, 2 more days. And then the next day they canceled all the flights again. We're like, crap. And finally the third day we're like, I just want to go home. All I want to do is go home. It's like negative 12 degrees outside with a wind chill. I'm like, I do not want to be here anymore. This sucks. I just want to go home. Like, not that it was substantially warmer at home. It was like, I don't know, 15 or 20 degrees at Reno. But I'm like, but it's not negative 12. So we get to the airport and like half the flights are still good. We get to the airport and like, okay, we're good. We get to our gate. They're like, yeah, you can still come through. But as we're like, we have like 25 minutes waiting for the gate. We're watching the board, canceled. They start rolling through, but our flight is still on time. We're like, okay, I don't know what this means. And finally the flight, they started boarding us to the flight. We're like, oh, okay, they're boarding us. We're like, are we sure we're going to take off? And my buddy his seat was like in the back of the plane. Mine was near the front for whatever reason. And I sitting down next to this lady, and I'm probably like, I don't know, 25, 26. And I'm sitting there just kind of like, she could tell I'm so antsy. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, I just want to go home. That's all I want. She's like, well, you're on the plane now. Like, when this plane has its wheels off the ground and we're in the air, I will believe you. But until that happens, like, I'm like, I am not betting on anything. And she's like, you just need a beer. I'm like, yes. Once this plane is in the air, I will relax then. Because for like the next 25 minutes, they back the plane out. And then we're sitting there, and they just didn't move. And I can see out the window, like, there's just piles of snow all over the runway. I'm like, we're not leaving. Then also I see the trucks drive out there, start plowing. I'm like, there's no other planes moving. It's just that. I'm like, what is happening? And then 2 trucks show up and start spraying purple stuff all over the plane to completely de-ice the plane on the outside. Like trucks with these big, huge pressure washers just dousing the plane with purple liquid to de-ice it. And then the pilot comes out saying, hey, we're the last plane to leave. They're de-icing us now, and the runway in front of us will be on the ground in just a minute. I'm like, you are shitting me. Okay. It's like blizzard conditions. They get out, we take off, and as soon as we get in the air, they're like, you know what? We got authorization. We're just not charging anybody for drinks. So if you need a drink tonight, it's on the airline. We're like, yes. The lady next to me, she's like, are you gonna be okay? I'm like, I'm okay now. I'm okay now. Beers came by. I slept the 2.5 hours, 3 hours to get home after I had a beer. And it was nice. But yeah, I haven't gone back to Chicago since then.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Shall we get into the show? We do our
let's do it.
Yeah, let's jump in. Let's do it.
Every time, Ryan, I swear this thing does not like you. Every time it brings everybody else's camera in except for yours. It's like, no, Ryan doesn't get to be on the show.
There he is.
There, boom. Glad to be here.
Yes, exactly. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate Brandon. Thanks for being back on the show, dude.
I'm awesome, so happy to be here. I always love doing this with you guys.
Excellent. Right on. It's gonna be a fun one tonight too. We were Ryan and I have been talking about this topic for a while, and I know when you were watching one of the episodes, you were like chiming on the chat. We were like, "Oh, we should do this," but we've been talking about this back and forth because, I know, at least for me anyway, it's been like when I moved here to the East Bay. I found there was a local comic book shop that one of the people at work was like, "Oh, you should go check them out." But I didn't for a while, and I finally went in one day, and I'm like, I bought a couple comics, and then the High Republic came out, and I'm like, I kept seeing people post on Twitter, "Oh, my pick list or my pull list from my comic book shop is I've got these things on." I'm like, what are they talking about? So I finally just DM'd somebody. I'm like, can you tell me what this is? Because I don't actually understand that. They're like, "Oh, you just go in and do X, Y, and Z." And okay. So I went down and I said, "Can I just put a couple things on a," they're like, "Yeah, it's no problem at all," which I know is something we're going to get into in here in a little bit, but it was, I don't know, even for me, someone who I tend to be kind of outgoing in general, I still get really introverted and kind of like shy about some things all the time. And about like going to a comic book shop and just people I don't know be like, "Hi, can you do this stuff for me?" felt so foreign and weird that I'm stoked about doing this episode so we can help people feel a little bit less strange about that. Like, because comic book shops now, well, and now that we've all been going to them, like they're like a bastion for us of like this geekery that we love. And when you start meeting people there, it's a community. It's an awesome community. But there's almost that it's weird because like even back in high school, like being a nerd in high school, and there was the cliques in high school, like you couldn't just go talk to somebody else because it didn't feel like you could. Like for us geeks, like a comic book shop, it's supposed to be for geeks, and it almost sometimes still feels like it's kind of a clique that you have to get into. And
yeah, it does.
Yeah, so I'm kind of excited about this because we get to hopefully help make people feel a little bit more comfortable about doing something new and unusual for them, but to have a really cool outcome from it.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty excited about it too because I feel the same way. Like even trying out a lot of different comic book stores in the past and like traveling and stuff, it felt like that. Like you said, it felt almost clicky. Like it's like, who do I talk to? What am I supposed to say to people? I think a big intimidation factor of it is like if you've never been in one before, you're walking into a place where you think and expect that everybody in the building knows so much more about everything than you. You know what I mean? Like you walk in and you're like, "Oh my God, I don't want to say something stupid," and they think I'm dumb because like, "Oh, I don't know about every single page of every book." But I think a lot of people don't realize that most people who work at comic stores don't literally read every comic book. Like
that's totally true.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have to, keep that in mind, and like that a lot of people who work in these places are so much more down to earth than like a lot of I don't know, media and stuff makes it out to be.
I was talking to somebody at work, not somebody you and I work with now, Ryan, but like somebody in the past, and they actually joke saying they just imagine going to a comic book shop and the person behind the counter is like that dude from the that stereotypical character from The Simpsons. Like that's what what they imagine. I'm like, no, that's obviously a joke and a stereotype. But they're like, I know, but that's just what's in my mind. I'm like, I don't want to go in because someone's going to do exactly what you just said, Brandon. Like, "Oh, well, you clearly didn't start at issue number 1, so I don't even know why you're bothering picking up that comic at issue number 3 or whatever." Like, make you feel just like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll leave now." Like no, that's like, oh God, no, that's not what it should be about.
No, not at all.
No, I agree. I also think too, it's kind of like it's one of these things where it's intimidating because you kind of get this idea of what stereotypically it's going to be like, or it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if this is my scene. Like you might be going into a comic book shop and you see a bunch of people there that maybe they're maybe they're having a very in-depth discussion about Magic the Gathering, and you're like, "Well, I'm not into cards, like I don't know cards," or maybe it's younger people and they're talking about things like anime or manga, and it's like it's easy to feel like, "Oh, wait a second, I don't know if this is my vibe or my scene." And I always think of it as like it's like starting any type of relationship. It actually takes time, regularity, and commitment. And it's like if you've got a local bar or really any local place that you're going to go to or a club that you might be joining, it's not something that just happens overnight. And it's just actually one of those things where if you go into your local shop, you actually can build a rapport by going back to that shop, by letting people know some of the interests that you have, and it not necessarily coming in and breaking off your like immediate knowledge about a certain thing. Like I always think that that's really interesting because you always have someone that's like, I want to let everybody know that I know this stuff. And it's like, no, you don't need to do that either.
Someone who walks in is like, I can quote you anything from Wikipedia right now.
Exactly. And it's like, it's a totally different thing. You can just kind of take your time and just kind of build a rapport. And this is just like I said, like going to your local bar or any other place that it's or if you're like a fan of a local sports team and you start going and frequenting that, it's one of these things that actually you build community like that over time, and then you get to find out all the cool things that you can do in that store, whether it is finding out what's coming when, or what I really like is recommendations from other people, which is how I've gotten into a lot of comics that I might not otherwise have ever read, is having that comic book kind of community.
Yeah, me too, for sure. Since I started working at my shop, I think I read 15 or 20 titles that I'd never even would have thought of reading. And, being there all the time, I get to at least check stuff out before I pick it up, because I can just flip through it and be like, oh, this is cool. But yeah, just like listening to people and talking to people and being willing to listen to somebody and hear them out, even if you don't know them and even if you're not sure. It's just like, it makes you feel so much more comfortable. We even have like a lot of regulars who like didn't know each other at all and had no clue who each other was. And just from the act of showing up on Wednesday mornings and waiting for the new comic books to come out and waiting for us to open, like they've all become really good friends, and now they all share book recommendations and they talk to each other about things. And they're like, now they show up 3 hours even earlier than that just to hang out and catch up. And it's like, you really don't know what kind of connections you can make with people if you just, like you said, you just kind of commit yourself to it and be like, you know what, I want to be interested in this, so I'm gonna be, and you just go for it.
Yeah, I noticed that with when I first started going to this shop, I was mostly doing Star Wars. I mean, I mostly do Star Wars books, but I have a few others I'll show you guys in a few minutes. But when I first started going, there was one person in particular I was talking to, because we just, for some reason, he was the one who was always calling to say, hey, we have this new book available if you want to come get it. So we would talk when I would show up. And then one day, to your point, Brandon, he was talking to a customer, and then another one of their employees was also talking to that customer about something, and for some reason it actually transitioned to Star Wars while I was in the store picking up something else. And so I walked up to pay, and I was waiting behind him, and he's like, oh, here, I'll move out of the way. I'm like, no, you're cool, man. Just you can keep talking. They're like, oh, Jeff, you like Star Wars. I don't think they knew my name yet, but they're like, you like Star Wars too, right? I'm like, yeah. Like, well, blah, 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 blah. And then it turned into just like, oh, well, yeah, I've got some thoughts on that. And we just started talking. And I haven't seen that person again since then, but it made it so much easier to talk to the staff that work there. And to your point, like now I get recommendations. I walk in and I'm like, they're like, oh, hey. And they're rarely Star Wars recommendations. It's like, oh, if you like that, you might actually dig this other thing we just got. Check this out over here. And I'm like, so when we did a show or an episode recently, Brandon, I think you were in the chat when I showed the Eternals.
Yes. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so when I got those, it was on a recommendation. They're like, well, if you're liking Star Wars, but if they're like, do you like the MCU? I'm like, yeah, and I'm actually really excited about some of the new properties they're doing. They're like, oh, well, then check out this new run of Eternals books. The art's beautiful, and the stories are really cool. I'm like,
yeah,
I've never read them anything like that before, so yeah, I picked them up, and they've been fantastic. Like, I'm thoroughly enjoying the stories. It's weirdly complex, but in like a super fun way. But I don't think I would have ever gravitated to that area of the shop if they hadn't said, hey, you should go check this thing out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, you took 1 second to talk to somebody you don't know, and then now you feel more comfortable around the employees who work there, and just in general, probably talking to people around the store.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that I've like loved about this, and it's funny too because even in this like time where it's like we're all like super connected, and it's like really easy to go to a lot of different websites and find recommendations on things, or like do a Google search for something. There's nothing like being able to talk to someone. I always think what's funny is that people who are new to something, or and I think that this is just like us as humans, like we're always worried to be the one who to say like I don't really know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny about that is that if you're really interested in something with a community of people who are also interested in it, and you then say I would love for someone to kind of point me in the right direction, I've never witnessed people go ha 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 ha.
Exactly.
Like everyone will, you're gonna get
Yes.
overwhelmed with like, oh, sit down, my son, let me tell you all of my
I will
recommendations.
bequeath upon you all of my knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff, a couple months ago, Jeff said that he was gonna watch a couple of episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Anyone who's been watching this episode, anyone who watches this show knows that I'm a huge Star Trek fan. This is actually my Christmas Star Trek wear.
I love that.
So
That's cool.
and I couldn't wait to tell Jeff about, oh, these are some episodes you got to see. And likewise, I feel like whenever you hear of someone who's like saying, I want to do this, or I'm interested in it, but I don't know where to start. And that is totally okay to say. Like, even if you're like brand new to comic books, my daughter had that experience at a comic book store that I took her to, where she really wanted to start reading comics, but didn't kind of know where to start, and knew that she wanted to read Captain Marvel comic books, and had an amazing experience where we were able to go and get not just Captain Marvel comics, but the one that she ended up really liking, which was the new Ms. Marvel. And and just because she said, I don't know where to start, point me in the right direction.
Yeah, it's actually, speaking of Miss Captain Marvel, I did just get this recommendation the other day. Genisvel. I don't know if you guys have seen this.
I've seen it. I haven't picked it up yet, though.
So it's like, the story is like, this character's father was Marvel, and like is this progeny of like Marvel and Captain Marvel, I think. But the character, he's like got these like gold wristbands on, and so he, like, this human, some reason got the wristbands, and so now he's like bound to this human, so the human can like turn into this superhero. The art was kind of cool. There was a cool recommendation. It's really not great. Like, the story is really not that enjoyable. I've gotten like, it's almost like, I think it's almost like a graphic novel. The thing is like 2.5 times as thick as any other book. But it's not sold as a graphic novel. It's sold as issue number 1. But it's like a graphic novel, like 4 or 5 different books in it in one. I got like halfway through yesterday. But this is a good example of, and Ryan, we've talked about this before, where like sometimes we just buy a book because the art is just like legit. And you're like, oh, cool, yes, I'm going to buy that because the art is legit. And then the story turns out to be good. And other times if someone says, hey, recommend, and I'm like, I love Captain Marvel, and I love that storyline, so I'll get this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this isn't awesome. At least I'm not really enjoying it a whole lot. But you know what? I wouldn't have even had a recommendation to even try something new had the person at the shop not been like, oh, hey, you like these things, you might actually really dig checking this other thing out.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I recently got super into X-Men again. I honestly didn't care very much about X-Men for most of my childhood, most of my young, but all of a sudden I was like talking to some of my coworkers about something, and how I really like sci-fi, and they're like, oh, well, have you heard of like Jonathan Hickman's X-Men work? It's kind of sci-fi. And I was like, no. And I've read all of it now, like in 2 months, like literally all of it. And it's incredible. This is where it's at right now. They just started Inferno. It's like his last little run on.
Oh, love the cover art. I would not take that. I wouldn't take that as an X-Men book if you hadn't said anything, because it doesn't look.
Yeah, it's great. There's so many different X-Men titles out there right now, so it's kind of like it can be overwhelming sometimes. But oh my god, it's so good! Like, it's this whole crazy new thing, and it's like same thing. Like, I would have never even thought to pick up an X-Men book, and especially because like they're crazy looking now, and I didn't know where to start, and just somebody's like, "Hey, just here, borrow mine. Like, you can check it out." And I was like, "Oh my god, I love this!" And now it's one of the things I read the most, other than Star Wars.
Oh, I had the exact same experience with so I came into comics I mean I there were always comics that I really liked, especially as a kid. Like I always loved the Green Lantern because I always thought, wow, that would be like a really cool thing to have. Like, you know, you have this ring and you can kind of like, you know, create anything with your imagination. And I also really liked a lot of the artwork, even that 70s artwork that is kind of like blurry. I entered a lot of the comic book world through television that I watched when I was a kid. I loved Batman the animated series. I mean, I own that entire series. To this day, I still think it's the definitive Batman. It is the Batman that I love to watch. I mean, I can, Clayface, the 2-part Clayface episode is still like, or the original Mr. Freeze introduction is unbelievable. And it was through there, and then X-Men, the animated series, that I was able to really start to get into. You know, I remember watching the Phoenix Saga and then thinking, oh, I want to read that. And then recognizing that the Phoenix Saga is a lot different in the comic books. And then going to comic book stores where I would talk about, well, I watched this or I watched that. And then having people say, oh, you know what, you would really like this comic book series. And I was making mention of, I haven't read X-Men in a long time. And I was kind of like getting kind of worn out by a lot of the titles. And I used to go to that website where it was, is Wolverine still dead? I'd occasionally go there just to make sure he was still dead. And I was like, oh, okay, good. He's still dead. And then he came back. And I had like read a couple of like the intervening titles. And then I was given a recommendation to read Battle of the Atom, which I've talked about on the show a lot. It was a way for me to get back into X-Men in a way where I just loved it. It was so light. It was so easy to get into. And it kind of, it had decent artwork, not the greatest of artwork, but very good artwork. But it had a lot of things in it that I love, which is I love, narratives that work really hard to try to reestablish a canon. I love when you have very clever writers who are like, I'm going to remerge these worlds together. I am going to take what is current and I'm going to somehow say that the X-Men are still of the 1960s, and I'm going to bring them into the future, and I'm going to have all of these people, all this unvarnished version of the X-Men. I'm going to take the original X-Men and bring them forward, so that way I get a young Jean Grey, and I get a young Scott Summers, and I get a young Bobby Drake, and then we get to interact with those characters the way that they were and the way that they are. And I love things like that. And it all came from a recommendation that I would have otherwise never even known about, and probably never even engaged with, had someone not heard me talk about, yeah, I really like the X-Men, but I'm really having a hard time kind of figuring out where I would want to get back into it. And I was like worn out. I was like worn out by the X-Men at that point. It was just like, I just felt like people are dying and then they're coming back. And it was like, who's this new person? And there were all of these like brand new people that were hard for me to follow. But yeah, recommendation. Read this one comic book.
It's crazy what happens if you just talk to people.
Yeah, 100%. I don't remember where. So this isn't a book. Or a comic book, but it's on the recommendation path. But speaking of like X-Men and Wolverine specifically, I think I've mentioned it here before, but maybe, I don't know if you all have heard it. So Stitcher is Stitcher does like podcasts and audio productions and stuff. They did a 2-season run of a produced podcast called Marvel's Wolverine. There are two seasons. Season 1 is Wolverine: The Long Night, and the second season is Wolverine: The Lost Trail. It is a full audio production, so you can. I'm pretty sure. I think I listened to them for free. To get them originally, you had to pay for them, and then they came out like months later for free on any podcasting app. But you can just go to any podcasting app and just search for Marvel Wolverine. Look for The Long Night. It is awesome. There's probably I'm looking at the cast and crew list right now, and it's like there's like I think in season 1, there's like 22 people who are the cast for the podcast. If you know who Richard Armitage is, he's the voice of Wolverine in the series. But it is phenomenal. It is full sound effects. Like, it's a full audio production.
That's cool. That's
full
really
sound
cool.
effects. Like, at least 25, 30 different voice actors to play all the different characters. So it's, it's a full cast produced thing. It is amazing. Season 1 is fantastic for its own right, because it gets you back into Wolverine trying to be like, he's trying to not be Wolverine. He's trying to, he's up in Alaska and he's trying to just stay the hell away from everybody. Don't talk to me. He's just trying to get away. And it's Wolverine, so shit always ends up pulling him back in again, whether he wants it or not. And then season 2 kind of continues that in the South, and he gets round up with like another mutant that we've probably heard before. But he does bring in, what is it? Not X Factor. Weapon X. Weapon X is actually involved to a degree, but not till the very end. And it's really interesting how they bring it about. And they end it in a way that is sort of like, oh my God, I would love this to continue. But we've talked about this before, Ryan. Like, but this was like such a good way to end the story. So there's like, I think I heard this on another podcast. I know it's not a comic book, but in the vein of like Marvel stuff and X-Men, because to both of your points, like, I've never been a big X-Men fan. Like the cartoon when we were kids, totally. And other stuff I love, but trying to read one of the books, it was never like a thing that really, like, there's so many other things I'd rather read than that. Like, maybe if I get through all this stuff first, I'll go to listen to X-Men. But this actually got me thinking, like, maybe I want to get back into that, because, or even try it out, because this is really good. Like, this is a really amazing story. Could I get into a book series, a comic book series that is similar to this? I just haven't gone and done it yet.
It's a great time to do stuff like that too. Just, I mean, you guys maybe have seen, but we're in a weird trend in the comic book industry right now, where there's tons and tons and tons of miniseries popping up, where it's like only gonna be like 6 issues, and it's like a new story starting, and there's so many good jumping on points for these like familiar characters like Wolverine. There's actually a Wolverine miniseries starting like I think next month. But all of these great points where like that, you're like, oh, I have, maybe I'm ready to get back into it. And then there's I almost promise there's at least one character you care about that's getting a miniseries within the next year. And so, like, now's a better time than ever for trying out new things like that.
Yeah, I actually, I missed the first 3 issues of this. I had never even heard of it. I'm gonna try to have to go back out and find them, but it looks like this was a 4-series run, or sorry, a 5-book run by Black Box Comics called Gin Hunter. Really beautiful artwork on the front of these things.
Oh, that's pretty.
Oh wow,
really gorgeous stuff. And I saw it in the store. I only saw issues 4 and 5. I'm like, okay, I'll go and pick them up. They're really, really easy reads. The story cleanly ends at issue 5. Maybe there's more, but it looks like it's just like you said, Brendan, it's a really short run, but really good. Like, I read them yesterday, and I'm like, I want to go find issues 1, 2, and 3, because these are just phenomenal. So if everyone's looking for something really easy to get into, and it would be easy even for kids to read too, it's called Gin Hunter.
Oh, right on.
That's a cool one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's like there's so many good jumping on points right now. Did you guys like the Michael Keaton like '89 Batman universe?
Oh yeah. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes.
Big fan of that.
So I don't know if you've seen this, but they continued the story of Michael Keaton's Batman in comics, and it's
really?
Batman '89, and it's only going to be a 6-issue miniseries. But like anybody who wants a really like quick jumping on point to comic books, and if you liked the Michael Keaton movies, this guy right here, like, this is such a cool series.
I remember seeing.
Everybody is like drawn to look like the original actors. Like,
that is awesome.
So good, and it's so 80s. Like, it's amazing.
My mom took me to see that movie in the theater when it first, in the first weekend it came out, and I remember going to watch it, and she's like, "Well, a lot of the critics say it's really not great, but she goes, you like Batman, right?" I'm like, "Oh, this looks great. Okay, go see it." We both walk out like, "This was awesome. What critics said this was terrible? They are wrong. Like, this was a phenomenal movie."
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of went downhill after that, but that first movie was fantastic.
I'm a huge fan of that. I really feel like too, like that, like kind of kicked. That was like, I feel like that might have been like the key into the lock for me to get into comics. was going and seeing Batman, the 89 Batman, and even with the darker Batman Returns, which is like crazy dark. I mean, Batman Returns is an allegory of the Moses story in the Bible. I mean, it's insane. Like, I mean, that's like it's like next level stuff that Tim Burton's trying to work out in this movie.
Yeah.
And then you know, all of these references to like film is in there. I mean, Max Shrek, Nosferatu. I mean, like there's so much depth to that movie, but it is not accessible. Like,
No.
there isn't a scene where it's, you know, have you ever danced with the devil on the pale moonlight, or an iconic let's get nuts, but it's like such a because I think if you don't have that, I don't think you get the resurgence of a lot of things that happened in the 90s. You don't get Batman the Animated Series. You don't get a bunch of people suddenly interested in comic books. And then you don't get what was a really like peak, like kind of big rise in comics, which was the death of Superman. And then when Batman has his back broken by Bane, hey Rich, has his back broken by Bane, and then Jean-Paul Valley is the new Batman for a little while, which itself is a really like psychological drama. And I remember all of those things were like how I got into comic books. And in fact, one of my first times going to a comic book store, when I was a kid, I was trying to get all of the comic books, the Batman, the Nightfall saga, and someone said, oh, you know, there's actually like a little novel that you can buy, and it's like perfect. And I was like a young kid, and I like read the whole little novel, and it was at my local comic book store in Manteca, California. So yeah, it was really it's really just something else back then when comic books were starting to resurge back in popularity. And then, yeah, like being able to go to a comic book store and having someone say, oh, you're interested in that? Here, let me show you what you should buy.
Yeah, I totally lucked out. Oh God, what, 6-7 months ago? So I had been hearing, I had heard about Neil Gaiman's Sandman, like over the years. I'd heard about it, but I didn't really know what it was. And for a long time, I just wasn't really interested in comic books, not since I was in high school. And I don't know I know what it was. I was watching, I had signed up for the Masterclass app on Apple TV. I'm like, you know what? I want to do some learning, but I don't want to just take a class. I'll watch this. And I was going through, I'm like, oh my God, Neil Gaiman's on here and he teaches this thing on storytelling. I am totally going to watch this. And as he's going through his course, by the way, if you haven't done that, if you haven't done Masterclass and Neil Gaiman's storytelling, it is phenomenal. But he talks about Sandman. He uses that as a reference along with his other books too. And I'm like, okay, I kind of want to read this. This sounds really interesting. And so when I was at my comic book shop picking up some Star Wars books, I asked him, I'm like, I know these were out like in the 90s and 2000s. There's no chance I can get them. He goes, well, I don't have the current run because I haven't made them in a long time, but I do have a book, like one copy of a hardbacked graphic novel of the original 6-issue run. He said, if you want that. I'm like, all right. It was not cheap because it was like a hardbound version of it. So it was like $40 to get, but it was awesome. I sat there, like you said, I kind of sat there like a novel and just kind of read it over the course of a few nights. And it's dark. I mean, it's dark and deep and kind of hard to get into, but it was really good. I'm like, oh my God, this is really fantastic. And it was kind of that entry point for me of, well, maybe if I just go down there and check out, walk around and look. I think this maybe we can get into some of the tips we want to give people. Is like, maybe if I just walk around and look at these books, I'll see something that strikes an interest from like the look on the outside, or someone gave me a recommendation, and I'll pick up something new that I never would have thought about buying before, even if it is starting at issue 4. It doesn't have to start at issue 1, which I think was so stuck in my head for a long time of like, well, if I can't find issue 1, then it's not worth picking up. It's like, well, it's enjoyable to start from 1, but these stories are still enjoyable stories. You don't have to only find the first issue to begin.
Yeah, and what a lot of people I think don't realize about that, to your point, Jeff, is a lot of people, in whatever your local comic shop is, can tell you when a decent jumping on point is, or they at least will know where to look, because a lot of people think, oh, like, oh, I didn't read issue 1. I'm, that's it for me. I can't read it. But a lot of comic series start new story arcs on like different issue numbers, like the High Republic. Issues 1 through 5 they can be read sort of as their own story, but then I think it's in issue 6, kind of a different plot point starts. And so like I would recommend to customers like, oh, hey, I know you missed out on these, but if you start on 6, which we have, you're not missing anything from these new story beats that are happening. And most series do that, like,
yep.
Amazing Spider-Man is 700 and something issues in. It's not the same plot for 700 issues. That'd be insane.
Well, but
there's lots of different little stories that take place in these that are jumping on point.
I think you bring up such a good point, though, Brandon. And this is a really good thing for anybody watching either live or in post. Is exactly what you just said, that Spider-Man, these books don't run for hundreds of issues in one long gathering story like like you're reading The Stand but in comic book. Like, that's not what's happening. It changes on a regular basis after so many issues to a new story thread, or just because that's how it plays out. So you don't have to worry so much about walking in and going, well, I don't see any issue number 1s here. Well, I guess everyone else has got these stories nailed. I'll come back next week and maybe there's something in here for me. Like, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
No. And, even stuff like, we're like Star Wars. A huge story arc just ended. So you pick up the next issue. Like, this is a fresh story right now, and it's on issue 19. I think the fresh story might have started on 18, but my point. Like, they had this huge 22 issue War of the Bounty Hunters arc. Some people weren't into that. And we have a bunch of customers who picked it back up at issue 18 because, oh, well, new story, cool. So much stuff like that. And then, like you guys both mentioned about graphic novels. Graphic novels are still comic books. They're the same single issues that everybody was getting when they were coming out, just way more convenient. And especially if you don't care about collecting, they're a lot cheaper too. Like High Republic, this just came out a few days ago. It's like $14 and it collects 6 issues. So you're saving money too. If that's, if all you care about is reading a good story, who cares if you were first person to jump on and buy issue number 1? There's so many ways to read it.
Yeah. I think that's almost, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, please.
I was going to say, that's almost akin, what you just said is almost akin to, I think that's a mistake people make completely unintentionally. Like, this is not like me talking down to somebody. Someone makes this mistake unintentionally, is you think that for some reason we think of comic books when someone maybe who doesn't normally now thinks of a comic book like, oh, well, I wasn't the first there. I'm not in the first wave of people learning this story. So, I mean, maybe I can't read this. It's like, were you the first wave of people who read The Lord of the Rings? Like, obviously not, because we're not that old. Like, so we were not the first.
Did you have your first edition Lord of the Rings? Because if not, I can't read that. I need it to be the first edition, first print, first run.
If you're not reading this as the Red Book of Westmarch, bound in leather, I'm sorry, we just can't be friends.
Exactly.
Like, it's just not a conversation.
Yeah. No, but like, you just kind of aren't on the same level as me.
Exactly, right?
Like leather bound.
Like, when I was 6, my dad bequeathed me a copy of the Silmarillion, and that's how life. I'm like, like, we all didn't just start reading, the Fellowship of the Ring or the Hobbit, when John Tolkien first published the thing. You can read it later, it doesn't matter. Like, I remember being in high school, speaking of Lord of the Rings, I remember being in high school and my dad said to me, oh, are you reading the Lord of the Rings? I'm like, Dad, everyone keeps telling me about this. I keep hearing people saying Lord of the Rings. What the hell is Lord of the Rings? He's like, you're not reading your English class? I'm like, I don't even know what it is. He's like, okay, I've got you. And then nothing happened. And then, like, Christmas 6 months later, he bought me The Hobbit. I'm like, what the hell is this? He's like, just read it. And I read it and go, oh my God, this is amazing. And he goes, the next is, and then he explained, but he wouldn't explain it to me until after I read this. But your point is exactly it. Like, you don't have to pick this stuff up when it first comes out.
No.
It's just a story. Like, you can read stories whenever you want to, as long as you get to enjoy them.
Yeah, and I feel like people get so afraid of walking into a comic store because they think it's very gatekeepy like that.
Yep.
And admittedly, there could be people out there like that. I've especially when I was traveling a lot, there are people in certain stores that can be that way. But that's why I like really encourage people, like, just look around town and look, just pop into your local shops and see which one like works for you and makes you feel comfortable and works for your personality, because there's a ton of them. Like, I work at a shop here, but there's a few other shops in town that I really enjoy too, and that the people are really nice at. It's just like, getting out there and just trying. And most of the time you're going to actually meet really nice people. Like nobody that I work with is gatekeeping at all. Nobody cares. Like you mentioned it earlier, but if somebody comes up and says, I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where do I start? None of us have ever been like, oh my God. Like we're just excited to talk about it. Like when somebody asks me, like everybody knows I'm like the Star Wars guy at work. Anybody even
I wonder what gave him that impression. I'm very confused.
What I read of Star Wars, I'm like, oh my God, yes, let's talk about it. I walk around the whole store and I'm like, you can read this and this and this and this. And it's like most people who work in these shops are nerds and they like talking about the stuff with people. Mm-hmm. Like that's what we want to do. That's why people work in environments like that, is because they like that stuff.
Yeah, and I would say that like it's so exciting sometimes to kind of share that knowledge. Like I'm always like super excited when I meet someone else who like has that background, because it's like, oh my gosh, like, or they're interested and it's like, wait, I can share this. 100% we're gonna talk, and I think that's kind of like what's cool. What's also funny is that I think that when people go to like a bookstore or a library, they're really accustomed to how that works. There are authors that I like to read, or there are subjects that I like to read. And the exact same thing applies to comic books as well. And what's great is you might have an opinion, and just like if you go to a library or a bookstore, you could have someone that could try to challenge you against that opinion. Like I was dyed in the wool that I would not like Superman comic books. Like I was like, I think I've missed that boat. And I was, and at the time too, I used to have kind of like a really big, like, oh no, Superman's really overpowered. And it's just, and I used to make all the jokes like from the old Superman movies, like, well, why does he just fly around the world and turn back time? And little snarky comments. But at the same time, I was met with, hey, you know what? Read All-Star Superman and tell me you don't like Superman comic. And I was like, okay, I will. Yeah. I will read the bound copies right over there. Go read that. You come back. If you don't like that, you come back and tell me why you don't like that. And not only did I love All-Star Superman, and even now, like, talk about segments from that, like how brilliant of a comic that is, how I then saw like how amazing Superman is as a character in this idealized version of what that character could be. By the way, if you're out there and you haven't read All-Star Superman, read it. So many people are trying to tell that good Superman story. It is. Oh my gosh. And it's because of that in that way that I was able to go to a bookstore and say, or like how, Jeff, you've talked about Neil Gaiman and authors that we all love, like Stephen King or anybody else. I then was like, I need to read everything that Grant Morrison is writing. I need to go and find these things. I need to go and read All-Star Superman. I need to go and read Doom Patrol. I need to take another step and read Flex Mentallo, and then keep going down that pathway. And just like with authors that you can like, there are artists that you can like. There are things that you can see from an artist and be like, you know what? I don't know that artist is with a different author. But the illustrations, I'm buying for the illustrations. And so that you can build your kind of like comics DNA in that way. And leverage experts that are there, just like they're at bookstores or libraries, to give you the exact same type of feedback. So I'm sorry. I love what you guys were saying about this, because that to me is so great.
It's awesome, dude. Yeah,
I actually wanted to piggyback off of what Ryan said too, because in that same vein, because there are so many authors and so many artists in the comic industry, let's say you don't like Superman. Well, that doesn't mean that you don't like Superman. Maybe you just don't like Superman being written by this author and artist and drawn by this artist. Creative teams change pretty frequently in the industry. And like, I mean, there's been, like, I used to love the Flash. I loved the Flash run when they started the New 52, and I thought it was awesome. And then they changed creative teams and I wasn't so into it. And then they changed recently and it's pretty good again. And Star Wars is the same way. Like if you read like a Charles Soule Darth Vader comic versus the new Greg Pak stuff, they have very different feels to them. They're both excellent, but like just because you don't like a character, if you hear, listen to people, because maybe you just don't like this author's interpretation of a character.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
it's just maybe I like sci-fi novels, but I'm not into Frank. I personally am, but maybe I'm not into Frank Herbert sci-fi, but I really love, Star Wars novels and Timothy Zahn or Zahn, however you pronounce his last name. But, it's very similar, and people don't realize how many parallels are between comics and regular everyday bookstores and everyday reading.
Yeah, I think that one point right there is one of the biggest misconceptions, at least I've encountered when I've talked to people about reading comic books, is like they're just books. They're just books. They're stories consumed in a different way in shorter form, but they're discounted because they're at least people I talk to a lot. They're sort of associated with kids and goofiness and Archie comics or whatever. Like Jughead's doing something silly this week. There's like this weird misinterpretation that they're like that, or that they're just for nerds or just for like some subculture. It's like these are just stories, and the number of labels or comic book houses out there that are making stories or writing stories with creative writers and artists is so vast that like it is not just Marvel and DC. You walk into a shop, they're almost like they have their little section, and then there's an entire other shop of all of the other brands. I mean, every time I walk through, like this one, Black Box, I'm like, I saw this comic, and I'm like, I've never heard of Black Box. I mean, that's not saying much because I don't know all these different ones out there, but yeah, like every time I walk in, I see something completely different than I've ever seen before. And I start remembering I need to pull them out. Like my old, Ryan and I've talked about this, my old Image comics from back in high school. Like I need to go back and actually crack some of those open and read them. They're graphic as hell. Like they're super intense. Pit, like all the old Pit comics were like, and the Max were just like so intense about everything, but they were like hypercolor and beautiful, and they're just books. They're just books. And if you think about them just as books, the visual aspect is actually just kind of layers in something really interesting to them, because so often when you read a novel or any sort of book, whatever genre you like, your imagination has to pick and choose like what things look like in your mind. And that's fun. There's something really cool about that. But something about comics is nice because there's almost a cognitive breath of fresh air you get by not having to do that when you read a comic. Because when you're reading the comic, that imagination piece, the visual imagination piece, is almost like, here you go. We're going to give that to you. You don't need to spend your brain power on that. You just get to sit here and enjoy a story. And, that doesn't make it less than a printed written novel. Yeah, I think it actually makes it's a different way to consume the story that doesn't make your brain, that makes your brain, like allows your brain to kind of really focus on something different, because you don't have to also then imagine, because there are some stories like Star Wars World. Almost every one that has come out, like I just finished reading in the latest Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn Ascendancy. I just finished reading Lesser Evil. It's amazing. Like I could not.
I love it so far. I've not finished yet,
dude. I won't say anything. But like I bought the printed book, but I was finding so little time over the course of like 2 days to sit and read it that I bought the audiobook. And what I was doing is listening to the audiobook when I had breaks, and then when I could go read, I'd go, where was I left off in the audio? Okay, go find that point in the written book and pick it up, just so I could read them as much as I possibly could. Yeah. But I love that. Like I could not put it down. Contrast that also in Star Wars with I'm also reading Star Wars Ronin, and I'm not even halfway through that book, and I can get like a few pages in a night, and then I have to put it down because it's not even that it's so dialogue heavy, but it's such a different style of telling this story in such a completely different way, because it's not it's, I guess you'd call it canon, but it's such a different interpretation kind of coming out of the Star Wars Visions stuff that it's hard for me to get through. So it's taking me more time to like, and if this was like Visions, what we saw in the short run TV series on Disney Plus, if it was like that, but in graphic novel form, I probably could get through it a lot faster, because I wouldn't have to try to imagine all this stuff that's playing out, because the author is describing all of these intricate things that are happening in the situation before advancing the story, that it takes me a bit to like, okay, the traveler is here and this person is here, but they're okay. Hold on, where are they sitting? Because that's clearly important, but I have to like work all that out first before I can then advance the story in my mind, and it's hard. It's sometimes it burns through, and comic books are really nice for that, because it saves you the mental energy of having to go through that.
Oh, totally. I really like that you referred to them not as less than, but other than. Because like I'm like you, and I love to read novels, and I actually loved Ronin. Once you get through it, I think you're going to really like it. But
I am enjoying it, but it's just
yeah,
it's
no,
work.
I totally
It's
get
a little
what
bit of
you
work.
mean. It's
Yeah.
this whole new universe. But like sometimes if I get home and I have like 2 hours, I'm like, heck yeah, like let's bust out a few chapters of this book, and I have time for that, and I have like the right mindset. But sometimes I've like had a long day, and I have 5 minutes to pick up a book, and then suddenly something that's like this with 15, 20 pages in it, and it's so nice to just like relax and be like, cool, I can get like a good chunk of a story in like maybe 10 minutes and I don't have to think that much. Like they complement each other. Just because you're into one thing doesn't mean you can't do the other. One isn't better than the other. Some of the most beautiful stories I've ever read came from comic books,
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say, like, my original degree is in English. I'm more than happy to talk about the birth of the British novel. I can talk to you about Lost Generation literature. The 6-word novel that Hemingway has, For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. These are great things, and like that doesn't mean that there is somehow there is high art and then this lesser art. They're all available for us to consume, and it's kind of like the difference between seeing a story on stage, seeing a story that's being told to you via like a movie, or even like I love old like radio shows, even though I know it sounds silly, but it's like I love that. I think it just comes down to if you're taking in something that has a tremendous amount of care has gone into it, and love and creation, it's going to be great. And I agree with you, Brandon, too. Like, if there is a unique element about a comic book, it's almost like trying a song before you buy the album. I have I went and found this was the original me walking by a comic book store and seeing this vector comic from where I just saw the artwork, and this is part 6 of 12. I didn't know anything that was happening in that series. I didn't know what was going on in the series. I didn't know what any of this was. Why does this guy have a monocle? I don't know. But I was like, I'm 100% gonna read this, and it was it was like $4. So here I'm making a $4 commitment and maybe 10 or 15 minutes of time to try out a story, and I ended up loving them. And I was like, oh, I've got to go and get them all. And that is the beauty of comics, is that unlike a movie, you can't just you can't walk out of a movie or buying an entire album or reading the collective works of Shakespeare. You can actually just kind of try on a story very cheaply, very easily. And then if it works, great. You're married to it. And if not, $4 investment and you're done.
You know what? Before we continue on, I do want to give a shout out because we got some folks in the chat right now, and I was going to try to post their comments up as their thread is going for anyone who's on. But I can't, the way I formatted our overlay here on the screen, everyone's things would just take up the whole screen. So, hey, Robert, Rich is out there. Thanks for being here, buddy. Robert's out there. Derek's here too, which is awesome. And they're just talking about the accessibility of comics too, and they've got their own thread going on. And it's awesome. I love to see.
That's great.
Derek was talking about. What did he say? He was talking about a Transformers book.
The Optimus Prime, when Optimus Prime died. I saw that comment. It came up in the stream there.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was. I remember reading the Transformers comics back in the 80s, seeing Optimus die, and I was devastated. Like, what? In the cartoons, they were invincible. First comic I picked up, and Optimus dies. Like, it's. But I mean, yes. But that's kind of the cool thing. Is like, wait, you. And you just, to your point, Brendan, like, it's just in a couple of minutes and you got right to there. Like, it didn't have to draw it over 10 chapters because we can just get right to this, watch it happen, and then in the next book, see what happens after that. And it can go through super quick and get to the point, but you're still getting a rich story. You're not just reading the Cliff Notes version. You're getting a totally rich story.
It's a complete story. It's just in lieu of more words, you're getting visual representations, and it's the same amount of content either way. It's just presented to you differently.
That's such a good way to think about it, because in a book, the author needs to make it work. The author does need to describe the scenario, the setting, so you can create that visual image in your mind of what you're looking at, where you're at while they're talking. But in the comic, they can give you the visual representation, so you don't have to describe that in words. You can just get right on with the dialogue because everyone can see exactly what's happening. And it kind of makes me wonder if more people were able to watch videos on or understand more about how comics are actually created, like how it goes from an author like a like a Charles Soule, or who's the other one I'm thinking, blowing my mind right now, Kevin Scott. Kevin Scott's one of my favorite, or Daniel Jose. I love Kevin, or Daniel Jose Older, or Justina Ireland, whoever. Like if one of them, like they write the text, but then they either partner directly with an artist to come up with the renderings, but then there's somebody who still does the lines afterwards. And I don't think most people know that there's that many steps in creating the text and then creating the visual art that you see. It's not just one artist. There's a couple of different artists who have different roles, who do the color work, who do the line work. And that's important because each of those things plays into what you're seeing in those panels. And that's, I mean, to your point, Brandon, like that visual interaction plays such a big part of what you're interacting with in the story in a comic, that when it's not done well, it can really detract from the entire book.
Yeah. And it absolutely, like, if you look at any comic book, you go to your local comic shop, look at any book, there's usually at least 3 names on any comic book you pick up, because that's what it takes to put something into this. And if you any random page, like how much is happening on one page, if just a traditional author tried to create that amount of description, that's going to take more than a page. Like, you really aren't making sacrifices. It's just, how are you wanting to digest the story? And that's why they do like comic book adaptations of movies and stuff. Even they're both completely legitimate methods of storytelling. God, I love Kevin Scott. He's great because, just on the High Republic thing, like he writes the High Republic comic series and he's doing an incredible job in the novels. And they're both great. They're both amazing. Yeah. Both by the same author, 2 completely different mediums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I love movies. Like, movies are probably like the art form where I'll just kind of get myself buried into it. Like, I love because it's the merger of all of these things that I love together. I love storytelling. I love music. And of course, really great movies tend to have really amazing music that's also kind of helping you on that emotional journey. And then there's and I know there's like a YouTube channel that is using this as a word, but every frame a portrait. And that's actually the beauty of a comic book. And I cannot undersell one of the greatest strengths of a comic book isn't just that you can very easily drop in, but that you can like see some amazing artwork. And that is always the thing that reels me in on a comic book is I mean, I can always get sucked in by artwork. I had heard of a comic book that and again, here's a really good example of something where it's like a different conveyance mechanism for the same story topic. Darren Aronofsky, who at the time had made Pi and Requiem for a Dream, had also wanted to make this movie called The Fountain, and all of the funding disappeared overnight, and they had all these problems in production, and Brad Pitt was going to be in it, and Cate Blanchett was going to be in it, and all these people were going to be in it, and then it just fell apart. And so then they decided to turn that into a comic book. And that comic book, the cover art is a little bit different than what you find inside the comic book. The comic book itself looks like it's watercolor. It is. There are frames there that are just unbelievable. It is beautiful artwork. And I got sucked into that. And I think that's the superior version of that story versus how it is tried to be told in the motion. He ultimately was able to make that into a movie. And it was a movie with Rachel Weisz and Hugh Jackman. And great that he was able to ultimately get there and turn it into a movie. But it was the artwork and how that story was told. I sometimes think great art comes out of boundaries, comes out of limitations. And that's one of the things that's amazing about comics, is how they'll use the limitations to their advantage. How you can see the build out of panels, and then boom, you've got like a double page spread of something, and it's just as startling by turning that page that if you were to have seen it in a movie. And or they'll have something take place outside of the frame, and they'll break their version of the fourth wall. It's so great, because comic books can be that not just a conveyance for amazing stories, but artwork, like really great artwork.
They really are.
I feel. Yeah. I'm sorry. I feel like that just became me on a soapbox saying, "Please read comic books."
No,
somebody get out there and read comic books.
That's really what this whole episode is all about. It's like, get out there, read.
Like, people. It's just such a beautiful art form. It's like there's so many types of stories that can be told through it, and I think people discount it a lot. Like one of my favorite stories from my job at the comic store is we had this guy come in. And he was trying to buy a gift for somebody, and he kind of had this weird vibe about him. And he's like, I think superheroes are really stupid. They're really dumb, but could you guys just like help me find a gift for my friend? And I was like, yeah, sure. I got you. Whatever. I'll help you find something. And I was like, by the way, there's comic books that aren't superheroes. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, there's like tons of comic books that have nothing to do with superheroes at all. Like any kind of thing. And by the time the dude left, he had a stack of books like this thick of like random various indie comics. And he came back like a few weeks later and he's like, dude, that stuff was so good. I loved it. And I was like, yeah, like that's, you just don't know unless you give something a try. And like a lot of stores too, they're very cool about it. Like just walk in and flip through something and see if it's for you. Like, you don't have to walk in and spend tons and tons of money. Like walk in and flip through a few books and see if there's something that
it's not like
out.
Everything is behind a gold case where like you don't get, you get to pick and then you have to leave and maybe you're going to like it. Like, no, you see people there all the time, pick up a book.
There's maybe some stores like that, but none that I enjoy going
to. No,
like,
not at all.
Yeah.
There's so many places that are so laid back.
It's like all habits, like, I mean, or not habits, but all, like things that you can get into, you can make it expensive, but the thing that I love about comic books is that you can walk out with like a stack, and it's not going to break the bank. You can find ways to break the bank. You can find ways to be like, oh no, I want this to be the bound version, all hard copy, like
or if you're walking and you're like, all those number ones up on the wall right there, I'll take all those number ones from like 25 years ago.
I've certainly found my own ways to make the hobby more expensive.
When they're all $80 a book, yes, it's going to be kind of expensive. But if you just get it off the shelf, it'll be fine. Well, listen, as we're kind of winding down for the night, because this has been fantastic. So Brendan, what's the preferred name? Is it pick list, pull list? I don't know. What's the preferred?
So it kind of depends on the store. The most common term that I've heard is like a pull box or a pull list.
Okay.
Some places will call it pick list. Some places will call it a subscription list. But generally, just like if you walk into your local store and you say, hey, do you guys have any kind of a subscription service? Most stores do. And the even better thing about that is a lot of stores, I can't obviously speak for everywhere in the country, but like here in Vegas, and I know a lot of places in California do this, a lot of places have like these pull lists, these subscription services for free.
Yeah.
Like I work at, it's called a store called Maximum Comics, but our pull list service completely free. Literally all we ask for is like contact information. And then like if you find one book that you love, or you find 20 books that you love, if you sign up for them, they'll just end up in your list every month, and they'll just be there waiting for you. And most places don't even charge for that. And so like that is a really cool way for people to, kind of, it's a way to alleviate that fear of like, oh no, what if I miss an issue and then I don't have them all, and then I'm missing out, and then I miss the story, and then I might as well stop reading it. And it's like, that's such a cool way to keep up with things. And most stores, it's not like a lot of stores gain anything huge from that other than, being able to sell you your books. But it's like, it's just a cool, like, we do it because it's awesome to provide the service for people and for people to feel like they're not missing the stuff that they really care about.
Oh, and I can tell you. So I have one at the local shop I go to is called Flying Colors Comics and Other Cool Stuff. And it's apparently been here in Concord for like, I want to say it's been here for like 25, 30 years. The guy who runs it, Joe, like from people I know who I work with who don't work with us anymore, but have been going here for forever, which is super cool. So I go in there and I added my Star Wars. It was like, can I just like, I just, it was the same thing you said, Brendan. Like, they don't charge anything. They just want my contact info. And they're like, I'm like, can I put Star Wars, The High Republic, Star Wars, The High Republic Adventures, and like, and they're like, oh, do you want to do the War of the Bounty Hunters thing? I'm like, I had just learned about it when it came out. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I don't know what that is. Like, okay, we'll just put it on the list, and when they come out, we'll put them in your box for you. So like almost every Wednesday, pretty close to every Wednesday, I'm getting a call saying, hey Jeff, it's Flying Colors, we've got this book for you. And it's like, I've actually posted on social media. This is going to be one of my tips. Is like I post on Instagram where the owner of the comic book shop is. I'll post on Instagram or other social media like, holy crap, this is like a good day. I'll go out to the truck and I'll be like, I got my new books for today. I'll do a quick video. I'll be like, this is super cool. I got these new books. Like Wednesdays are my favorite days because I get the call that my pull list is ready and I drive down to the shop because it's like 5 minutes away. But it actually, that kind of tip on the pull list that you were talking about, I think is a fantastic one for people who are like, well, I found this one book and I kind of want to keep up on it. Just like you said, most places I've experienced don't charge anything for it. And then also a lot of these shop owners or people who work in shops are on social media. You are, all of us are. Post something like post something that you are excited about this thing that you just got. Like genuinely like, holy crap, I just got these new books. This feels really cool. I've got something new to read tonight because you're part of a community. And when you do that,
and then that's another great way to meet people and talk to people and get to know even more titles.
Yeah. And the community that you become a part of when you go to a comic book shop does not have to begin and or end with the store itself and being in person. Social media is a community and you can engage with people in that medium, which can then, it worked for me, translate into, I walk in and the owner, like one day I walk in to pick up something and he walks through the shop and he goes, oh, hey Jeff, how's it going? I'm like, but you don't, how do you know who I am? I'm like, masks on and everything. I'm like, he's like, oh, well, I saw your post on Instagram. I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty rad. And so now whenever I walk in and I see him, like when he did when the free comic book day happened a few months back, I walk up and I got in line and he was out there and I walk up and talk to him for a couple minutes before it was my turn to come in. He's like, Jeff, how's it going? Oh, by the way, while you're picking up your free books, I got this other new thing I thought you might really find interesting because it's got great art. Okay. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Yeah. And it just made the whole, like, I was only there for like 10 or 15 minutes because they were busy, but I got my free book and then I got to go buy a book that was really cool and I left super duper happy. And I'm like, this is fantastic.
Yeah. And that's like that, those are awesome, like really cool relationships that you just build them by walking in one day and just asking a question and nobody ever minds. And like that's my favorite day too. Like all of those books that I've been showing this whole episode, it just happens to be what I picked up in my pull box this week. It was not prepared. But like from the other side of that interaction, like those pull lists, it's really cool because I can see like what a customer is reading and I can see a list of the kind of things they like. And it even helps me like as an employee be like, oh, I could see this person's reading 8 Star Wars titles and 3 other sci-fi books. I bet they'd love the Dune comic series that's going on. And so it's just like another layer of like, it just helps you build this relationship with the people wherever your local shop is. And like, just another piece of information where it's like, I can give recommendations to people because I know what they already like to read. And it's like so low risk in most shops. I don't know if your shop does this, but like most of the shops here, it's like, if there's something in your pull box and you decide you don't want it, also cool. No big deal. Like we just put it back on the shelf. Like it isn't even a big deal. So it's like, it's really low risk, low stress. Like just give it a try, you know, like just ask a question. And like, I think all three of us can, the relationships you build just by talking to people about the stuff that you love, it gets to be really awesome. And you discover so many cool things.
How about you, Ryan? What's a good tip from you about your comic book shops?
I would just say that there's a lot of different entry points. Like we opened the show and I was talking about things like a lot of other things that you can find there. There's a lot of adjacent communities around comics. Like it's not just superheroes. You can get people that are also, if you're a really big fan of things like Star Wars or Star Trek, you're gonna find a nice little side community there. I don't know why, but I always seem to find people too that are like, they'll have deep knowledge on things like Stephen King or the Dark Tower series or horror. You'll have someone who, there's all of these little like entry points. People that care a tremendous amount about anime, people that will talk about things like the Transformers comics from the 1980s. There's a lot of really great ways that you can enter. And one of the things that I think is always great to say is, I'm really interested in blank. What would you recommend? And that's because there's absolutely, again, like no one's going to be like, gosh, I have to share with you the knowledge that I have in this area. You're gonna get like amazing recommendations, and it's a low risk, low cost thing. And what's also really great is, local businesses are I mean, we all, there's a lot of work in needing to support local businesses, and here's this great way that you can give back to your community while building community, and again, like find things that you wouldn't have even known existed. When I was a kid, I didn't even know there was like a run of Star Trek: The Next Generation comic books that came out from DC, and I was able to get into them because of that. My wife was able to go and procure a bound set of editions of all of the original Star Wars comics that came out with Star Wars in 1977, and then everything else that came with that, and that was a gift. Artwork that you could find. I got that Millennium Falcon through my comic book store connections, or even just like, again, finding a story that you would have never looked at. I didn't know anything about Strike Force Morituri, and all that came from just having a conversation at a comic book. So it's a low risk entry, and all you had to do is Google search comic book store near me.
Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
And try out a few, even,
yeah.
Try a few of them out. Run into a few of them. You just like, it's a different story. You'll find people with different opinions, people with different tastes, and maybe you don't click with the people at one store. Try a different one. Don't let it discourage you.
Yep.
Because you will find somebody out there who is kind and is willing to help you.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. I don't want to stop talking about this because we can talk comics all night, but it's been one of our longer shows tonight. And also Robert and Derek and everyone who's still on the live stream, thank you so much for sticking with us. It was awesome to have you all here. Brandon, do you want to Brandon, thank you also for being on the show again, because it's just all,
thank you so much.
Speaking of like community, where we meet people in a community and then we become friends with them, like we interacted through chat on social media, and now you've been on our show a bunch of times, which is completely rad. So,
well, I think just because me and you were talking about Star Wars books one day, I think is how that happened.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally how that played out. Like you were just like, oh, I like your content. This is really cool. We should do this more often. Do you want to give a little shout out for the shop you work at?
Sure, I would love to do that because I really love them. So I'm out in Vegas, and I work at a shop called Maximum Comics. We have a couple locations here in town, and I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, mean it. Our owner is such a wonderful person. Everybody who works there is such a great person. And like, I have another job, and I begged the dude. I was like, listen, I don't need this job. I just really want it. I really want to work here because I love being here, and you guys are the reason I fell in love with comics. And so like, I literally work at this place for fun because I love it. And because of the community. And so like, I really can't say enough good things about it. I was a customer there for 10 years before I started working there. So if you happen to be in town, come check it out. Cause I cannot say enough good things about everybody involved with the place.
Well, I mean, worst case scenario, Ryan and I are probably, if everything works out, we're both going to be in town in June of this next year. So
I was just about to say that, Jeff. We're going to be there in June. I was going to say, we should totally hang out.
Oh, totally.
Yes, we should. I would love that.
This will be 100% a thing.
Right on.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Brandon, for being on the show, man. It's been really good to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Oh, totally.
Anytime.
And everyone who's been here, thanks for sticking with us. The ultimate thing I think all of us are saying is go to a comic book shop, give it a shot. To Brandon's point, just whether you like superheroes or not, that doesn't matter. Like these are books. You can enjoy books. If you like stories, a comic book shop is like the most accessible place in the world to go to get into any story, because you don't have to commit to a full novel. And I mean, most of these books are for the most part, $3.99. So $4 for pretty much any book you want.
Yeah.
It's not much. It really isn't.
Nope.
Right on. Well, listen, everyone have a great night. Thanks for being on the show. Subscribe, all the things. Oh, I didn't hit let me see if I can get this to work. Does it work? Oh, nope. It broke. But I got a subscribe button.
We got subscribe up.
We got subscribe.
I'm the subscribe button.
We got subscribe and we lost Ryan. Well, there it is. Subscribe, like, all the things that help the algorithm. It's really helpful. And if nothing else, we will see y'all next week.
Hey, thank you so much.
Have a good night,
Brandon,
everybody.
thanks again for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye, everybody.